Hello, all, and welcome to today's New Economy Fireside Chat with me. I'm your host, Aashish Mehra. I'm the Chief Research Officer at Markets and Markets. At M&M, we take great pride in transforming market intelligence into revenue impact for our clients. Our research focuses on disruptive emerging technologies and futuristic trends which would lead to significant shifts in your revenues in the coming decade or so. Through these new economy fireside chats, our objective is to share actionable insights on new revenue growth opportunities which are emanating from disruptions in your ecosystem. And they're usually based on the client work that we have done or our own research. So, in continuation with the theme of sustainability, I'd like to talk a little bit about electric vehicles today. As we know, global warming is one of the most critical issues staring at us today. And obviously, emissions, vehicular emissions, is a very big contributor of that. And therefore, a shift towards electric vehicles is indeed a move in the right direction. And it's not only Tesla, but most of the conventional automakers, whether it's Daimler, BMW, Volkswagen Group, General Motors, Honda, and many others have started launching their EV range almost every year. But the big question that is staring suppliers of conventional ICE automotive companies is how quickly will this shift happen? I don't think anyone is doubting that a shift is in the works, but the question is of timing, right? And when should you start to plan your investments in accordance with that? And it's that timing issue and the inflection point on when EVs on the roads will be far more than the ICE vehicles. That's what we'll dwell on today. And for that, I'm very pleased to welcome my guest, Navin, who leads our automotive practice and has done a lot of work with some of the major players in this space. So, Navin, a very warm welcome to you today.
Thank you, Aashish. Great to be here.
So, Navin, why don't we dive in? Give us a baseline to start with. Tell us a bit about how many EVs are really being sold globally today, and what's the percentage of the total vehicles on the road?
Sure, that's always a great place to start with. So before we actually talk about how many EVs have been sold or was sold in 2021, what you need to realize is that in relation to what you've already mentioned, there is a mandate for reducing global warming, and the biggest or the fastest way to do that is to reduce vehicular emission. Various governments around the world have initiated a number of mandates in support of this. And with that in mind, that is also the same reason why you find a number of OEMs moving in this direction of introducing new models. 2020 was a year where we saw flat growth for EV sales. But what is interesting is in 2021, we saw more than 100% jump, meaning in 2021 alone, there were close to about 6.5 to 7 million electric vehicles sold. So that is quite a considerable jump, especially if you consider when you look at the overall growth of passenger vehicles, barely going a little over 4% or just standing under 5%. So in terms of sales, 2021 was a great year. You're looking at a 100% jump. You're looking at 6.5 to 7 million vehicles. And if you want to put that in context, that accounts for around 8 to 9% of all passenger vehicles sold globally.
Wonderful. So coming back to this question, which a lot of our clients pose to us, if I'm an auto component manufacturer or I'm supplying, adhesives or other items to the automotive world, which are largely used in ICE context, should I be worried? Should I be making significant investments now? How much runway do I have before, the EV wave just throws me off gear? And tell us how does one bring some method to the madness? What are the key sources of uncertainty that will decide the EV growth trajectory in the coming 1 or 2 decades?
The question you ask is, should they be worried or should you be worried? But the way I would put it is, how excited should you be? And the reason for that is we already know that the EV is coming. It's just a question of how soon is it coming and how hard is it going to actually hit the market. Now, we started our conversation with some interesting statistics, more than 100% growth of electric vehicles, which is quite amazing. But if you actually look at the total fleet that's on the road today, so I'm not talking about new sales, I'm talking about vehicles which are on the road, EVs account for just hardly 1% of that. So effectively, you still have 99% of vehicles on the road which are not electric, which still need to be serviced, which still need to be maintained, which still need to be supported by an ecosystem.
Naveen,
Right.
tell us what are the most critical uncertainties or factors which will determine the pace of growth of electric vehicles? And then let's dive a bit into each one of those.
Absolutely. So if you, at the end of the day, when you look at what are the key elements that needs to support the electric vehicle ecosystem, it comes down to the charging infrastructure. It comes down to what are the products being provided by an OEM. It comes down to what are the supporting regulations. It also comes down to what are the various competing technologies that are already present in the market. So for example, advancements in gasoline or diesel engines that could not necessarily give them an extra life, but more probably, I would say, extend their life a little bit more. And of course, the more other important aspect I can put here is when you look in terms of the advancements taking place in battery technology. Now, the reason why we've concentrated these five main elements here, and this is where the uncertainty lies, is if I were to take each one. Now, if you look in terms of battery technology, it's predominantly lithium-ion technology. But as everyone knows right now, we're also in the midst of a supply chain crisis. And especially when you're looking at the raw materials for lithium ion, with most of them being concentrated in just a few regions of the world, it's not very comforting for many OEMs, or for that matter, end users, especially when that is the most crucial element for your product. In a similar fashion, if you actually look at what are OEMs doing in the market today, so many have made a lot of ambitious announcements. We're still hearing about announcements about 2030, 2035, and so on. But you also have to remember that there are announcements made that there be a 50% move towards EVs by 2020 or 2022, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, with no one to blame when you're looking at coronavirus and now the chip crisis and the supply chain crisis, and now the recent Russian-Ukraine crisis. All of these, unfortunately, will tend to add or push that movement a lot more further. So again, this is again adding to the uncertainty, mainly reflecting around supply chain.
We dive into each one of these. So let's talk about EV charging, right? What's the baseline? What's the situation today? And what needs to happen to accelerate the pace of EV adoption? If you could just talk a bit about that.
So if you look at the EV charging infrastructure again at a global level, what's again very common is more than 50, or you could say about 60 to 70% of the market is again captured by China. Now that's again one of the main reasons as to why China has been successful and is a lucrative market for electric vehicles. But having said that, there's been quite a bit of advancements in terms of the number of charging stations deployed in Europe as well as in the United States. There have been, I would say, contention in terms of will the infrastructure be able to support all the electric vehicles that would be on the road in the next 5 to 10 years. But what you also have to look at is that's the worst case scenario. Rather than always looking at the worst case scenario, it's always great to look at the realistic scenario where you're not going to be seeing all vehicles being charged at the same time. So technologies such as vehicle to grid is again supporting the move towards EV adoption. And that's something where even a number of utility companies are coming into the market and pushing this drive across.
Correct. And what about battery technology? Could you tell us a bit more about how is the technology evolving and what needs to happen to accelerate the pace of EV adoption?
When you're looking at battery technology, there are two aspects that are always coming to everyone's mind. One is, where are all the raw materials coming from? Now, with most of it coming across from China and South America, the only concern over here is that how can we always ensure that all the OEMs have the required supply for the models? The second aspect over here is basis the technology which is already there, mainly focused on lithium ion. We're also talking about the charging density of these batteries. We're also talking about the cost of these batteries. Now, till about 4 or 5 years back, the cost per kilowatt hour was as high as $1,200, whereas today it's as low or close to $100 per kilowatt hour. So that's a substantial drop here, making it more affordable and, of course, making it a lot more easier for the price of the vehicle to an end user. Now, I've spoken about lithium ion, but there's quite a bit of work happening across the globe in terms of sourcing other materials for other battery chemistries. Now, sodium ion is something which is quite interesting. And the reason why that's very exciting is the material is quite available everywhere. Now, it still hasn't reached high penetration, or it hasn't really made a mark or a dent in the market as such, but it is encouraging that there are other battery chemistries being looked at. The other aspect is, I think when you look at within the lithium ion family, we're also looking in terms of lithium ion phosphate. You're also looking in terms of solid state batteries. We're also looking at advanced solid state batteries, but these are all still very much under development. And we're going to really start seeing some movement or some traction from them only towards the end of this decade, by 2027, or I would say 2030.
Got it. And what do you see as the role of regulation in some of these markets as a way to accelerate EV adoption in the coming years?
A key question that's always asked across the board, or statements which are always being made, is that who can help in the EV adoption? So there is one faction that says that it's the government that needs to do this. There's another faction which is saying that it's the industry or the OEMs or the suppliers that need to do this across the board. Effectively, what has been unanimously decided is that it needs to be a cooperation between both parties. And the reason why I'm talking about this, especially when you're talking about regulations, is that it comes to the fact that, is it going to be the carrot or the stick that's going to drive the market? Now, if you take China as an example, it's a market which was heavily driven by regulations and mandates, and you can see the results. They're quite successful. If you look at the number of EVs per capita, they're still not the top. So that title goes to Norway. But if you look at absolute vehicle numbers, they've done exceedingly well. Now, if I move to the other coast, and if you look at the United States, there are a number of states that have brought in mandates or subsidies in the form of subsidies in the price of the vehicle or tax subsidies. But what you also need to remember, there is no federal mandate been brought in. Everything is at a state level. And realistically, if a federal mandate needs to come in, we don't expect to see that anytime before 2035. And again, you can see the results over here. When you're looking in the United States, if I were to look at the percentage of EV sales last year as a percentage of total passenger vehicle sales, it was just over 2%. So it's quite low when you're looking at the entire global scenario. So regulations and mandate are extremely important. It is something which is going to push the OEM. It is something which is going to push the supplier across the board. But at the same time, you're going to need the OEMs and suppliers to also work with the government, especially in terms of creating that ecosystem, creating that supply chain so that you're able to bring down the cost of ownership as we move forward.
Right. And what do you see as the role of the OEMs themselves in accelerating progress on the EVs? Because the OEMs have also announced massive commitments, strategic commitments. Whether it be the German ones or let's say Renault or Hyundai in Korea, and so on and so forth, right? So what do you see as their role in helping accelerate the pace of adoption?
Well, they play a major role here because at the end of the day, when you look at the end user, they look towards the OEM in terms of what's being offered into the market. So there are announcements, there are commitments that more than 50% of your portfolio is going to be fully electric. You're going to stop manufacturing IC engines by 2035, which is very encouraging. But until the end user actually sees a good fleet, variants, options of electric vehicles coming from the OEM, you're not going to be able to convince anyone to invest in an electric vehicle. Now, to just give you a quick idea, if you look at the United States as an example, the cost of an EV today can range anywhere from $25,000 and can go all the way up to $100,000. Now, that is quite a substantial investment, but you also have to remember that the number of models that are available in the market doesn't really cross even about 20 or 21. And they've been in the market for the last 10 years. I'm talking about the EVs right now. So from a perspective of an end user, if you're not seeing that many variants, that many options present in the market, you're not going to be comfortable in investing that amount for those vehicles, although the return on investment will be a lot better for you. The OEM's role here is to really push forward, maintain those commitments, actually ensure that they're able to get the production back on track. And if that's taking place, if they're in a comfortable position, I think that's going to really help in the EV adoption going forward.
So I think let me come to the big question. When do you see the inflection point happening? Let's pick a region like North America, for example, which is not as advanced as China, but yet it is an important part of EVs. So in North America, when would you expect the inflection point to happen? When you put all these uncertainties together and do your modeling?
When we have all the uncertainties, when we see the current economic climate, when we see the supply chain disruption, the chip disruption taking place, and very specifically looking at North America, realistically, I believe it's something which should take place by anytime between 2035 to 2038. Now, when I'm saying anytime between 2035 to 2038, that's ideally when we see the EV sales overtaking that of IC engines. So it's still plenty of time for companies to actually make good on what they've been promising, and still plenty of time for new battery technologies to come in. But considering where we are right now, we really don't see any major movements taking place within this decade.
Got it. Great. Well, on that note, Navin, thank you so much. It was a pleasure chatting up with you on this very interesting area. So thank you so much for your time. Folks, we sincerely hope you enjoyed today's chat. And until next week, goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, Aashish. Pleasure to be here again.